you weren't the only one enduring. You had a community behind you, and
Mm.
and uh, many of us, unfortunately, are lacking quite a bit in comparison.
Hello and welcome to Shared.Care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, Corey. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. It's great that we can chat around the world. You're in the United States. I'm in Australia. We like to think that we're on top of the world, but we'll let you take the mantle. They just write the maps the wrong way around.
No. You can take it. You can have it.
But it's wonderful now. I think, as much as COVID was a bit tragic in a lot of ways, but the fact that it encouraged people around the world to communicate in the way we're communicating and have these conversations, I think is really wonderful. It's given us the ability to connect with people that we probably wouldn't have connected with before.
Absolutely. I'd say it's long overdue and much needed.
Yeah, definitely. And for the audience, who I've got here, it's Corey Jung. He's a United States Marine Corps veteran. He's also a tactile athlete, and he balances his earlier life, and he studies now around mindset, recovery, nutrition, and movement. And he also serves as an advisor to the Marine Raider, the U.S. Marine Corps Special Forces Operation Command, and he also helps out with the U.S. Forestry Service. So, Corey, let's start more broadly speaking. In today, there's a lot of discussion about men feeling more lost, lonely, and not useful in society. And even men are not about, it's only about 40% of men are completing higher education. What have you seen in your area, more broadly speaking, then we can narrow down to some of the specific issues?
This is a big subject,
Mm.
and I would say it's inclusive. Um, and I would say what's very eye-catching in the news and social media regarding men, it's a symptom of a much larger and complex issue. Um, it's inclusive, and so I would say both sides of the aisle. It's a human issue at
In
the end
what
of the
way?
day.
In what way?
Well, I mean, I gave you many talking points prior, and even an image,
Yeah.
and we can maybe play around with what we see there. But I feel well. This is something that's coming to my mind presently,
Yeah.
given our talk and subject. So, sociobiologist Edward Owen Wilson, if that
Hmm.
rings a bell. So he
Mm.
wrote the book Biophilia and the Future of Life and many other works. And he was a Harvard professor, and he mentioned something in regards to what he felt were the core uh, obstacles, challenges to the human predicament.
Yeah.
He said that we have these Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions and godlike technology. And I would say that's kind of a recipe for not so much the greatest success with all that are concerned, men, women, children. The list goes on.
So it sounds
Go
like
ahead, sir.
you're talking about the technology, you say godlike technology, but our Paleolithic way of thinking, we haven't evolved our way of thinking to keep up with the technology we've got. Is that where you're heading with that?
Yes, it's a. Some people would say it's a mismatch. They would say it's hyper novel. Two evolutionary biologists come to my mind. There are a couple, Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying, and they use the term, from their field, EEA.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the environmental evolutionary adaptedness to our species, and not just our species, all life for that matter? And we're really not wired for this modern civilization. It's just been here a few cosmic seconds in the big picture. 90% of our species existence experience on Earth had been that of nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Mm. Do you think?
And so, yes, sir.
So is it a case of we can't evolve, or we have the capacity to evolve to catch up? Or if some people evolved and they're living quite comfortably and other people are not?
Evolution is a slow process. And yeah, I feel that so it's a bell curve. Some people aren't doing so well. Some people are doing, they're better adjusted. And then people who are really, you have the bookends as far as outliers, people who are doing really great and people who are doing really poorly.
Mm.
I mean, so we can look at this from a biopsychosocial model. So, sociology and one's, socioeconomics has a lot to do with it. And if you're in a first world developed nation, you're probably doing a lot better. I also like to amend the biopsychosocial model with something that predates it, and that of evolution, paleoanthropology, and mythology.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's both and. So here's the thing. The human body, compared to the space shuttle, makes that look like a tinker toy. So what it comes down to, it's a complex system.
Sorry,
Just
which one is the tinker toy? The space shuttle?
space shuttle is a tinker toy. The space shuttle is a tinker toy compared to a human being.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Understood.
And so one human life is a complex system. I think there's about 78 organ systems. It's a system of systems. And so imagine multiplying that by about 8 billion human beings.
Yeah.
So welcome to complex systems.
Yeah. But isn't life pretty simple and we just overly complicate it? Because, it's not, it's not hard to be happy if you want to be happy. It's not hard to have money if you want to have money. The rules for those are pretty simple. If you want to have money, for example, if you want to have wealth, you add value, so you create some money. So that's how you earn money. But to have wealth, you just save a little bit of what you earn and invest that bit that you save. It's a pretty simple set of instructions. Very few people do it, but the instructions are pretty simple. And then if you just go out there, there's all these different, so many different advice, and if you just jump on some of the video, well, the main video channel out there online, and there's all these ads popping up going, oh, do this and do that, but really it's pretty simple. And Warren Buffett's been giving that advice for 50 odd years, and just following what he says, you're pretty much guaranteed to have wealth. Are we overcomplicating it?
I'd say that there's an aspect of that. I often say this, it's so simple, it's difficult.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Is it so simple that we have to make it difficult to try and justify that it's? I mean, because you look at the world, and water is really important for our survival. But how often do we take that for granted?
quite often.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's perceived value and then there's real value.
Mm. And that's what I'm
And
wondering.
so,
Are we overcomplicating this when we're talking about men being lost lonely? Are we going, well, are we overcomplicating it? Are we getting too bogged down in too much detail and forgetting core principles?
yes, I'd say we're overlooking the fundamentals, the first principles. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of the distraction,
Mm,
spectacles, uh, and so I feel this we live in a golden age of sorts as far as information,
mm,
and I imagine there's along with that, unfortunately, there's quite a bit of misinformation,
yeah.
and so I feel the average person is probably having a bit of difficulty separating the wheat from the chaff.
Mm,
And then as far as the many ideas out there, I'm borrowing from Carl Jung,
mm.
paraphrasing. I would ask the question: do I have these ideas, or do these ideas have me? And so,
Star
as
Wars,
far as
do I control the Force or does the Force control me? Is that where that
right,
comes?
yeah, perhaps I'm not quite sure, but and so, like, if someone is going after a goal, is it authentic? Is it genuine to that person, or is it something that is handed down from their parents, uh, academia, perhaps some cultural or belief system,
Mm,
some institution that is you know stating that it should be this way, perhaps, and is that person just buying into that, and it's not coming from them so much. And so there's a saying, it goes something like this: that happiness often is getting what no, success is getting what you want, happiness is wanting what you get.
mm,
And then there's another saying in regards to this, I feel that you can tell you've reached the midlife when you're top of the ladder, but you find the ladder against the wrong wall.
yeah, that could be a problem.
And so, money to a certain point, and you might have recall hearing this,
Mm,
that supposedly somewhere around the $70,000 mark, as far as the U.S. economy and currency,
mm,
if you have all the the basics covered, and you have a little bit of a cushion, and you're comfortable, that anything more than $70,000, and this is when this came out years ago. I imagine the number could change today, but you're good. That you have a good quality of life and are generally healthy and happy.
mm,
Considering everything is equal,
yeah.
but often that's not the case either. As far as what's the state of one's health, and not just physical, mental,
Mm,
emotional, and perhaps spiritual as well. So in some cases, you can have everything as far as the popular culture goes. I mean, you look at some of these entertainers, sports figures, music, Hollywood, that they have a lot of fame, they have a lot of notoriety, they had a lot of career success and material, they have a lot of assets.
mm,
But then, why is it that often, unfortunately, a number of them um, have addictive challenges, challenges with addiction, and in worst case scenario, they wind up committing suicide.
yeah.
So you can have everything. You can have everything at times in one hand, and then nothing in the other.
Mm. And I've heard that from that perspective. A quote that I was told is like, "Money doesn't buy happiness, but poverty does." and but and and that was a question, not a statement, in the second part of that. And it's what does material things have to do with money? And I can put that from that perspective. I mean, I've I've been to 44 countries. I've gone to Nice, flown to Nice, and had a chauffeured helicopter take me personally, me and my family, to Monaco. And that's pretty cool. It's fun. There's no doubt about that. That was so much fun. But to say if it was fulfilling, if that's all I was doing, it's not fulfilling. You know, yes, it's fun. Fulfilling's a different thing. And what you were talking about there is happiness is wanting what you get, which is an interesting statement when you talk about, do we choose our goals? And I've done a number of writing on, do we need to understand our why to get what we want? And I relay that an experience I had was I was working long time ago, and I was doing some really basic data entry type work where they downloaded all this data, and it didn't match correctly in the spreadsheet. The columns didn't line up for the line items, so you had to go through them. There was tens of thousands of line items that all had to be lined up manually, and so I was doing that work, and I treated it as a game. So mind-numbingly boring in reality, but I treated it as a game. And I'm relaying that what you're talking about there, happiness is wanting what you get, because you're in America. You guys released the first feature-length animated movie, Snow White. Walt Disney did. And in that movie, while they're cleaning the house, Snow White and the animals, they're singing "Whistle While You Work."
Yes.
And we know, as soon as you don't even have to do it, as soon as you have a happy thought, your body starts producing dopamine and serotonin. And this comes back to, I wonder, have we spent too much time just going, oh no, we need to work out our why, as opposed to, why do we want to do this? Why are we here? Rather than just saying, I'm going to do this, and having that approach of whistle while you're working. I mean, if you want to take it further, go into I think it was the 70s or 80s with Mary Poppins, and a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. She had the lines
Yes.
from the line from the movie was, with every job that must be done, there's an element of fun. Find the fun and the job's a game. Again, I'm pretty sure they didn't understand dopamine and serotonin back when they wrote that. Certainly back in Snow White, they didn't. But do we need to have that attitude of just going, hey, I'm whatever it is I'm going to do, I'm going to enjoy doing it because that's my choice.
Right. I feel that there's many layers to this, and that perception, positivity, and positive self-talk. Yeah, these are tools that we can exercise while we're going through our day to day, and life, hopefully winds up being a marathon for many people, and they get to experience the many seasons of life. And along the way, it's like the weather. There's going to be highs and there's going to be lows. It's not going to be sunny all the time, and it's not going to be gray, cold, and rainy all the time. It's like theater, I would say. Or it can be. And there's a bit of drama, there's a bit of tragedy, there's a bit of romance, there's a bit of comedy. And do we have the endurance to see it through?
But do we need endurance? It's like if you're looking at being a fully functioning person, and you go, okay, I'm going outside, I want to go outside, and it's winter and it's raining, and then going, oh, it shouldn't be raining. That's a reality. And even during summer, sometimes it rains. But to say, oh, it shouldn't be raining today, is that really, from our perspective, us losing touch with reality? Going, well, sometimes it is going to rain. The question is, what do I do with that? And because one of the things I was looking at, Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2, nothing is good or bad. Thinking makes it so. And is it a question,
Mm,
we're looking at it and we're going, what we want, we're going, I want it to be sunny today. It's summer. I had this picnic planned. I'm going to have this wonderful time. I had this weekend. I went down to a community market and I was helping out with the community market more broadly. And it wasn't a great weekend here, but still went down there. And it was a bit cold, a bit windy, but there was a
mhm.
lot of people out there having a great time. So they weren't going, oh, this sucks. And certainly from my perspective, I didn't even notice. I was too busy getting on with doing what I was doing. I didn't even, at first I did, and then I got a coffee and I was fine. and,
Right, right.
but what happened was when I was busy interacting with people, connecting with people, I was having such a wonderful time. I didn't even notice the weather. Um, so I'm just wondering, is it a case where we get so hung up on an expectation in our mind and we forget what reality is, and going, well, this is nothing is good or bad. It's just an event or it's just a situation. What do I do with that? And how do I approach it in a way where you don't even have to? How do I just be busy doing what I'm doing as opposed to getting caught up with it's not the way I want it to be? Which,
Right.
when you're really looking at that, that's probably a narcissistic attitude. When you look at narcissism, what narcissism really means, your opinion's above what the reality or the other situation is. Is that where we've got to?
Well, I feel a lot of times with the overabundance of information and marketing and the news and media and social media that it kind of has people a lot of times leaning toward this direction. And it sounded like when you were out there uh, enjoying, and despite the weather, that you found yourself at a place of gratitude and acceptance.
Mm,
Yeah, gratitude and acceptance, and so I mentioned like information, and a lot of the times in the form of advertisement, let's just say.
mm,
And I'm not quite sure what it is elsewhere, but I know in the United States, the last time I was looking into this, that supposedly 85% of marketing targets the hindbrain. And so the hindbrain has a lot to do with safety, survival, and rank.
mm,
And so a lot of the marketing strategies targets one or a number of those things. So survival, sexuality, and rank.
mm,
And that's so 90% of our consciousness is unconscious consciousness. And so a lot of times what's going on at the surface is a result of something that we're not even consciously aware of, unfortunately.
mm,
Um, you were mentioning endurance earlier. Endurance is a it's a tool, is a skill set, and I think right time, right place.
mm,
Um, and as far as just whatever the weather is or isn't, uh, acceptance is a big one. And I live and work on a farm,
mhm,
and I'm in California, and so California, like much of the West, for many years, has had higher than normal temperatures, especially during the summertime, and a lack of rainfall. And so,
mm,
this past rainy season, even to this present month, we've had considerable amounts of rain. And I'm just thinking to myself, and I'm talking to my friend here when we're working the farm, that I'd I'd I'm I'd much rather, and I welcome the rain. I'll take that over a drought. I'll take that over a drought.
yeah. Is that a
So,
case where because we mentioned water before, and
mhm.
being we appreciate things when we don't have it, as opposed to, as you mentioned, gratitude, reminding ourselves regularly of what we. And I know you in America, you guys do this really well, because I'm a huge NASCAR fan, and watching the pre-race show and how you give, and you worked in the services as well. I was in the SAS here. I was posted to the SAS, which is our special forces, uh,
Mhm.
and but you give a lot of gratitude, And probably because you fought so hard for it to have the freedom that you have, and you give a lot of gratitude to the military because, you know, the freedom that you have was hard fought. I mean, back when, you know, was it 1700s, when 70, was it 1776? Don't test me on American
No,
history.
yeah, you got it.
Okay, cool, I
1776.
pass. But from that perspective, you fought a very bloody war to actually have the freedom that you have, and it appears that you still remember that and are very grateful for that, and give recognition to the fact that you actually continue to strive against that, because there's forces in the world that would take that away if they had the opportunity. Um, but is it a case where we just need to keep reminding ourselves, have in place a habit, because habits are very powerful, a habit of just reminding ourselves, hey, this water that I'm drinking now, I need to be grateful. As much as it's abundant, I need to be grateful for its impact on my body and how it keeps me alive.
So what is your question now?
Well, my question was, do we need to shift that focus from, you know, to being grateful, reminding ourselves and being grateful for the things that we have, rather than taking certain things for granted? You mentioned about being in California, where it doesn't rain very often. And when it does rain, you're really appreciative of it, but you're appreciative of it because you don't have it that often. But when we do have things in abundance, do we need to still continue to remind ourselves that it is, you know, these things are important?
I feel it's something vital
Mm,
that even though let's just say this rainy season we're doing rather well,
mm,
that's not a guarantee long term.
mm,
And so, in addition to gratefulness, be aware. Have some awareness, and not just gratitude in regards to the water, but everything that supports yourself, others, and place.
mm,
And it's life requires a multitude. And so I mentioned perceived wealth or value and real value, for instance. And so, knock on wood, but imagine if all drinkable water became less so, or there was such a scarcity,
mm.
and the health of the oceans, the health of the rivers, the health of the atmosphere, the health of the soil. I mean, could you, and massive desertification? Could you imagine what would then take place? And not just for our species, but many species upon the planet.
Well, how
And
often
then
do
ask your
how often do we take bees for granted? I mean,
exactly,
we've
exactly,
seen the bee movie, but the reality is, without
right?
bees, life essentially stops, as far as I understand it, unless I'm wrong. But without
No, I
pollination,
mean, right, right. I mean, that would be a biggie for sure. And so
yeah.
let's just say if it ever, well, knock on wood, once again, if it ever did come to that, we could probably ask ourselves this question: can you eat money?
Well,
There's a Cree prophecy, and those are one of the native people up in Canada.
mm,
And I think the prophecy goes something like this: I'm paraphrasing, but along the lines of, when you cut the last tree, poison the last river, and kill the last fish, only then will you realize you can't eat money.
mm,
So perceived value, market value, like stock market, that goes up and down. That's a lot of that is emotion based.
mm.
It's perceived.
100%.
It's perceived.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, real value is the healthy biosphere, a healthy being, healthy relationships, and healthy place, which
Mm.
is related to, once again, the biosphere. And so I feel, unfortunately for many people, that's not so much on their radar.
I mean, you mentioned about being aware of what you have, and I want to link that back to a statement that you made earlier. You said that an overabundance of information has people leaning toward a certain direction. The part of that I'm interested in is this has people. It's almost as though we don't have control. And I'm linking that to, I mean, back a long time ago now when Apple TVs first came out, when the first generation came out, we bought them and I had a lot of DVDs and I converted them and put them onto a hard drive. And we basically turned off free-to-air TV. So, and we just watched stuff on Apple TVs. Or the things that, you know, all the TV shows that I had on DVD. So, but what it essentially did is it removed ads from our content that we were consuming. And I noticed it was about 3 months into that my then wife, her two stepdaughters, they were young children, but they stopped asking for McDonald's.
Mm.
And so this is where I'm coming back to that question you have is, you know, from my perspective, my phone lives on silent. Literally, and my emails and that, there's nothing there. And I still don't have free-to-air TV. You know, I enjoy certain shows and I'll watch them when there's news that I want to watch. There's certain things I want to know about. I'll go to the source, and that's the one thing that we have. Outside of that, I choose what the content is that I want to watch. And so I'm wondering about your statement here that it has people, as though people don't have control. Do we have control, or don't we have control over our own choices?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the person, and I would say awareness, comes into this picture once again,
Mm,
and then what is, and maybe we could bring this up as well and say, or ask the person, well, what is it that you want? What is
mm,
your, what is your goals? What is your purpose? What is your values? And are our thoughts, words, and actions helping to support that, moving us toward that,
mm.
or not? And so it's like, are we being efficient with our time, energy, resources, for instance? I guess it comes down to values, principles,
Mm.
priorities.
I mean, I wonder about that too from that side of things. Is like, I mean, awareness, and I love that you're talking about awareness so much. You know, but I wonder is do we need to be aware that, hey, especially in our society, that we do have control and we can choose, as you said, you know, what do you want? And I changed that question because I used to ask people a lot of the times, what do you want? And they, oh, I don't know. Was kind of a mumbling response that I'd often get. So then I asked the question, I thought about it and went, well, actually, you have a choice. So I asked people, what do you choose? And it was
Hmm.
almost like with a lot of people, a light bulb went off, and it was like, what? I have a choice. Like, yeah, it's your life. You get to, I mean, in some places you don't, but
Right.
certainly in our world, I
Yeah.
mean, in America and certainly in Australia and a number of democracies, you get to choose. Do you realize you have that power that you can choose whatever it is that you want to do? And do we need to, one, encourage people or remind people that they have that choice, so that they can decide for themselves what it is that they want to do?
You know, you're right. We and we're fortunate, you know. We have, or many of us have quite a bit of gratitude in the West, in the industrialized world, in this modern world. Uh, yeah, we have freedom to choose, or not,
Yeah, well,
or do nothing, right?
yeah.
Uh, so thoughts are very powerful,
Mm,
and thoughts often can become things. So before
mm,
the thought idea of the automobile, there was the thought, probably more likely, the idea of the thought of the horse and buggy.
mm,
Now, thoughts can become things, and they're so powerful, but they're powerful in both directions. So they
Mm,
can create a lot of beauty, or they can create a lot of, the opposite. And so, to give you an example of something that's very powerful, but not so much on the beautiful side of things, the idea of E equals MC squared. What did that help create? They helped to create the atomic bomb.
mm,
And so, be mindful, once again, be aware of our thoughts, words, and actions. Um, and go into thoughts, which basically that's where our words come from a lot of
mm.
times. This What's coming to my mind, what I'm remembering is, I believe it's a Hebrew word, abracadabra, which
Okay.
essentially means something along the lines, I speak and I make it so.
Oh, really? Because yeah, that's a
So we can,
magician's line, abracadabra. Is that where that
mhm,
comes? That makes
yes.
sense. Yeah.
So
Wow.
we can create magic in a
Mm,
ways. We can create, we can speak. The ancient Egyptians, if I remember once again, said something like this: the tongue is the rudder of the soul.
mm,
So we do have a lot of, or many of us are fortunate with a lot of agency.
mhm,
And so, are we being responsible to ourselves and others, in in helping us to move towards our highest potential?
Because that's what I wonder a lot of the times, do we have, and that's why at share.care, well, as much as we don't really have an order of principles, there's 10 principles, but the first one is self-responsibility. Um, and there's a quote that goes along with that from Sophocles, which is, it's a hard thing. I'm paraphrasing slightly because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it's a hard thing to face, that when we look at our own problems, that we ourselves caused them. Um, is that, something that we need to, when we're looking at men, for example, coming back to, what is manly, that we need to have that self responsibility and say, okay, we have the power to choose what we're doing. Even where we might be, in a repressive society, certainly when you look at the American forefathers, when they stood up and said, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. We want to be an independent, and choose our own direction. That we have do individuals need to take that responsibility and say, I have the power to choose how I'm going to create my life.
You know, it's possible, and I would ask, does the person care enough? And
Mm,
are they once again aware and mindful? And you brought up, history a few times, and
mm,
so whether that's the history of the nation or the history of one's family,
mm,
um, so many of us are here today due to what our ancestors had to endure.
mm,
And in some cases it was, maybe more in regards to family history, or it was in regards to family history, both, and with what was happening within the nation, perhaps the world at the time. And
mm,
so, we live present day. I mean, if you just turn the clock back 100, so yeah, what was going on 100 years or so ago? You had the Spanish flu. You
mm,
had, it was right before the Great Depression. And if you go back, at least in this country, if you go back further, let's just say mid 1800s or so, so I don't know, maybe that's 6 or 7 generations.
mm,
You had a lot of people who were, you know ex- pioneer, pioneering west,
mm,
and having to travel and endure the Oregon Trail, which is about a 4 to 6 month journey, and
mm,
not everybody made it.
mm,
So there was a lot of suffering, and perhaps tragedy, that helped get those people there, and some of which are our ancestors, or some
mm,
people's ancestors. And so, what we have today compared to back then is, I would say many Americans, especially compared to much of our nation's history, and especially that of human history, especially if you look at post World War II on,
Mm.
I'd say that we're living like basically, we have Hollywood and then we have Disneyland.
Yeah.
It's we have it so damn good in comparison, and not to say that there is still, not to say that there isn't any misfortune and tragedy and traumas present day, but in the
Mm.
big picture, in comparison, we're doing pretty good. Could we do better? Sure
Well,
we
that's a
could.
question I wonder about as well, because you've mentioned gratitude. You talk about, the history and the hardship people went through. And I look at that even from my own history. My grandfather, you mentioned World War II, my grandfather, he escaped from 2 concentration camps, was shot twice. Um,
Hmm.
and then he came out as a refugee. So my background is I'm a war refugee. My heritage came to Australia as a war refugee with a suitcase. He lived, there was no work where the camps where people went to. So his wife and their 2 children, being one of them being my dad. He went, which was 6 hours away back then, by train, to where the work was. And he saw his family every 6 weeks. And back then they didn't have, like you and I are talking, around the world. They wrote a letter, it took a week to get there, and then he got a response a week later. Um,
Hmm.
and you look at that and you look at what we've got today. So yes, there are issues that we solve, but is it a case where we're too focused on, okay, yes, we need to focus on the issues and solve the issues, definitely, but we forget the component of what we do have. I remember a long time ago, and for the long time listeners, you've heard this story before. When I was living in Perth and driving up the coast, there's a lot of traffic lights, and I get frustrated because I was getting the red lights, and I was like, oh, I was getting the red lights, and but because I'm anally retentive, I decided to count. So I had a little notepad next to me, make a tick next to the green if it was a green one, and the red one. It turned out I was getting a massive amount of massive amount of green lights, very few red lights. But because the red lights were frustrating me, I was getting more emotional about it, and that's what I was focusing on. Do you think today we're in that state where we have that mindset where we have all this wonderful opportunity? And we mentioned water before. We have all this water there, all these great things that are wonderful for us, and we're focusing on the couple of things that aren't so great.
Right. You know, it reminds me of, I think they mentioned this in evolutionary biology, that our species, and not just our species, we tend to have a negativity bias.
Mm.
We're really good at pattern recognition, and a lot of that having to do with threat recognition. So we focus on the negative. We focus on the lacks. We focus on the wants.
Mm.
And I think that's where marketing a lot of times comes into play, because marketing comes down to a neuroscience, and marketing, aka public relations, was founded by Edward Bernays in the early 1900s,
Mm.
who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
So he was able to borrow from, some of the insights of his uncle Sigmund, so as to be able to manipulate the masses.
Hmm.
Uh, and
Yeah, I
I
mean,
want to take
Bernays taught, as much as he hated his wife smoking, he taught the women in America to, especially sophisticated
exactly,
women, to smoke. Correct. Yeah,
yeah, torches of freedom.
exactly. That's
That's
the one. And also
that.
he increased the bacon consumption as well.
Hmm.
Um, but from that perspective, I mean, this comes back to this whole control thing. Do we have a choice? And that's where I was wondering from that perspective, we talk about focusing on the negative. And is it a case of we need to evolve, but how difficult is that if we just choose to focus? And I know, maybe I'm different, but from my point of view, I made a choice and going, okay, I'm going to focus on, so from that example of the red lights and green lights. So every day, I think of the things that, I look at my day and go, what did I do? I don't beat myself
Mhm.
up of what I didn't do. There's a long list of things that I didn't do, but there's a lot of things I did do. And I just make a conscious effort, and it's now become a habit. And now it's unconscious even, where I don't have bad days. I don't feel bad on any day. Stuff happens, stuff that's not so great. Some people, I mean, I've had friends come to me and said, how are you still standing with all the crap that you've had go on in your life? But it's like, well, there's a lot of good stuff, and I focus on that, and that's a choice.
Right.
I mean, is it a case of we just need to have that collective and have these conversations that you're having, share that with more people, and go, hey, just focus on what's you've got in your life? I think Oprah Winfrey said, if you focus on the things you have, you'll always have enough.
Right. And I want to mention something else, Damien, and I feel it's related. So it might be a bit of a segue, or seem like a bit of a segue.
We can
And
segue.
so I would say that you and myself, and then from what you shared with me, a few moments ago,
Mm,
that perhaps we're a little bit atypical. We both have military service background,
yeah.
and SAS is pretty elite. I was in the Marine Corps, and so, and I believe we're about the same, or about the same age, and so we have that as a bit of our background, a bit of our experience, a bit of our development. And so the way I see this for myself, that in early life, I'm at least midlife now or so, but early life, I was say maybe more of the warrior archetype.
Hmm.
Nowadays, I feel I'm probably closer to the sage. I'm maybe something of a warrior philosopher, and if we
Mm,
look at one of those, uh, if I remember, Plato was a warrior philosopher. He was a hoplite,
mm,
and we both have been tested. We've been initiated, and I imagine not just the training that you've experienced, but maybe you've also had some experience in theater. And if you had experience in theater, perhaps you were a little bit closer to life than you were at death at the time. And I don't know about
mm.
you. I don't know about you, but in my experiences with that, you can learn a hell of a lot about life when you're very close to death.
The
It's like
theater experience.
there's a rite of passage. There's a rite of passage that occurred.
The theater experience you mentioned is quite correct. I mean, from that side of things, as you would know from doing that, you get to know yourself pretty well, because if you're going to act well, you have to know yourself very well. And I had the good fortune of working with a lot of really good people. I was actually at the school at the same time as same school as Hugh Jackman when he was there, and he was a lot skinnier then, didn't look like Wolverine.
Mm,
But just wonderful guy, and there's so many wonderful people there. But you really had to get to know. You had to strip away the layers to do this really well. And that's would highly recommend that for people to go and do some acting courses. Just not because you want to be an actor, but to get to know yourself. It's a really powerful way of doing that. A really practical way of doing that. But again, this is where we're coming back to from that experience. Is it a case of a friend of mine, wonderful, she's amazing, but she said, we learn through pain until we learn to learn through joy. And is it a case where we need to get to that point where we go, actually, we can learn through joy. We need to have that self-reflection. I do here where I record these. I'm down in the beach house. I've got a big lawn, and I got rid of the gardener, and I bought myself a self-propelled lawnmower, one you walk
mm.
behind, not electric one that you walk, little battery powered or big battery powered one, that you walk behind. And I do what I term gumping. I'm Forrest Gump, and I'm just going up the lawn, and I don't put any headphones. Well, sometimes I put headphones in, but don't put anything on, just so people don't disturb me. Um, and just have that bit of solitude, bit of reflection, because rather than waiting till I get this pain moment where I go, oh, no, now I've got to start paying attention, I'm actually reflecting on what's happening and going, oh, how can I learn from that? How can I do this a bit better? And I do that via what I call gumping. Do we need to have that, for guys? Do we need to encourage however that is? And most guys probably talk about, even you mentioned meditation to me, I'm immediately going, but gumping, it's the same thing. Do we need to encourage guys to have that self-reflection?
I believe so. I would say it's healthy when it comes to one's self-development, and talking about knowing thyself.
Mm,
What's that? What's saying, the temple of Apollo at Delphi? Know thyself, and you will know the gods. You will know the gods in the universe.
yeah.
And this comes down to self mastery.
Mm.
Um, and and not to say that women can't do this as
No, but this
well.
is where this is a man's
Yeah,
safe space.
yeah, yeah.
We can
But
have man conversations, and it's interesting what you mentioned there too, and it's how many, well, all of the women that I've had on the show so far have said, men need their safe space. We need men's spaces, same as women need women's spaces. We
well,
we are
right.
we are, we're not the same. That doesn't mean we're not capable of doing, equal things. We can do.
hmm
But we do have ways of operating, so if it's a safe space here to be manly.
I would say it's there's if you go back to nomadic hunter gatherers, 9 times out of 10, there was like the men's and the women's group during the daytime, and then everyone got together at night.
Mm,
The women were, maybe teaching the children about some cultural things, singing, dancing, chanting, medicine,
mm,
sorts of practices. And then the men maybe were out there, trying to, help feed everybody. It all depends on the culture, the time and the region, of course, but something along those lines. And so, people had these social networks,
mm,
and these little these groups, these tribes of sorts, and that you weren't the only one enduring. You had a community behind you,
mm.
and many of us, unfortunately, are lacking quite a bit in comparison to our ancient ancestors. And yeah, it's so
Well, even not so far back, I mean, I look at, say, for example,
yeah.
my parents or my grandparents, certainly my parents as well. I mean, certainly when my grandparents came to Australia, just to survive, they had to work as a community. And my parents were sort of similar as well, and I'm, I think from that just maintained that. Where, I mean, I look at where I live here, in the places everywhere I've lived, I've got to know my neighbors and chatted to them, and we've had conversations down here where I am at the moment. I know all the neighbors, and we might not speak to each other every day, or might not speak to each other for weeks, but I mean, there's many times where I might be going, not going to be here, and I'll say, can you, send a message? Can you check out this for me while I'm away, or put my bins out while I'm away? And we all work as a community. Do we need to bring that back a little bit and just, hey, look, let's connect with each other? Have we got too isolationist in how we're operating?
I believe so. And what you're sharing brings this to my mind. And it's not just happening in the US, it's probably happening, unfortunately, throughout much of the world. But there's a great deal of depression,
Mm,
unfortunately. There's a great deal of mental health, and unfortunately, suicide.
mm.
And at least in the US, there's one community that I'm aware of, and maybe this is something that has caught your ear as well. You know, one group community in the US who's doing a lot better when it comes to something like this?
No,
The
okay.
Amish. The Amish.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
They're very,
the
very community focused.
exactly, exactly. And then the way they live is something, uh, basically along the lines of, they're as if they're in the 1800s still.
Mm,
So, they have a relatively simple life. in compared to a lot of people nowadays. Not to say that they're not working hard, and a lot of it, physically uh, laborious, and probably working a lot of long hours because
Yeah, I get
they're
if I'm going to dig
yeah,
a hole, I can have a shovel or an excavator. I prefer an excavator. I've done both.
yeah.
But I like to get together with people and connect with people, and I think from a mental health perspective, that's certainly where I mean they would. I'm sure they would have that. Well, from what you're talking about, I haven't been to an Amish community, so I can't. I'm speaking very very broadly, and if I get this wrong, apologies for people that are going to write in. But from that side of things, it seems to be that they have more of a willingness to interact and communicate with her and spend time together. And I'm wondering, I'm going to reference pop culture here again. You'll remember the movie Crocodile Dundee. And there's a scene within that where they're talking about a psychiatrist, and he's like, well, psychiatrist, and it's like, a psychiatrist is where if you need to open up about a problem or get the problem out there, you go to a psychiatrist and talk about it. And she goes, oh, you probably don't have a psychiatrist in Walkabout Creek. And he goes, no, in Walkabout Creek, if we have a problem, we tell Wally. Wally tells everybody else, no more problem. And is it a case where we've overcomplicated this, thinking where we've got all these problems that no one else is experiencing, and if we actually just talk to somebody, like an example was on the weekend of the market I was at, they had the street machiners, the local street machiners club there, and they were displaying some of their cars. But they talked about how they have a regular fortnightly meeting. Everyone can come along, and they just get together and have a chat. It's not necessary. I mean, it is partly about cars, but just general. It's a collective where they just get together. Anyone's welcome, and they'll just get together and have a chat. And listening to these people talk, they seem to be quite comfortable by having that community. Do we just need to encourage a little bit more of that? Let's just get together and have a chat.
We're social beings.
Mm.
It's in our nature. And going back to in the military and looking at the Amish as a group, just one example of many groups that us humans form. But I guess one way we could describe that is look at the team cohesion, basically. And in the military context, I mean, so same species, same but different. And so in the military, team cohesion, you have this like there's this brotherhood of sorts, and everyone is looking after everyone's six. And if that rings a bell, right?
Yeah.
And so imagine the everyday person.
So for the non-military people, looking after your six is someone looking after you behind. So they're checking your back for you. They're looking after you.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not so much and then especially with these elite groups, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, that part of the selection process, you could be, the strongest, fittest, you could be this, physical specimen, but if you have a really bad attitude, and if you're not someone who's really willing to sacrifice and give and serve to the team, to the group, and also be a part of the legacy of the unit, the organization, 9 times out of 10, the people who are running the selection process, they're not going to pick you because they see you more as a liability, not so much as an asset, because you have this attitude. It's all about me, and that's one that's selfish, and it's not really going to contribute to the broader community, and ultimately that could be someone that's really dangerous to the success of the whole team.
What you're talking about there too, and you will have known this from your military experience, is one of the programs they have, one of the courses they do is called the confidence course. Where, and this is for the audience because you'll know, Corey, is the confidence course is not something you can do alone. You can be the toughest person.
Right.
You will never succeed on that by yourself. You have to work as a team to make it through. And the other thing that I love about the way the military operates, when you look at the military medals, all of the military medals are awarded to someone who sacrificed themselves, not necessarily died, but sacrificed themselves to help others. And whereas you look at a lot of awards that we give out, it's usually for someone who's worked, independently, and even especially in business, crushed someone else,
Right.
which is a different approach to encourage that teamwork, to supporting each other's. And we know the biggest, and there's so much research now supporting this, the biggest sense of satisfaction that you have, when we talked about, earlier, I talked about me flying out. Well, I didn't fly the helicopter, I was chauffeured, but taking a helicopter from Nice to Monaco, you know, the sense of satisfaction that I get from helping other people greatly outweighs that. Yes, the helicopter was fun, but what I was doing on the weekend, where I was helping people at the community market, that far outweighs that as to how I feel about myself. And is that something we need to, encourage people when we're talking about manly, especially for men, and say, hey, you have a great amount of power, immense amount of power. And
Responsibility.
yeah, Spider-Man, great power comes with
Right. See?
responsibility, exactly. But do we need to encourage them that power is one, your power is to be courageous, to create courageous, courageous, intelligent, sensitive, kind, and compassionate. That's what your power is for.
And I feel that we have a responsibility to ourselves, we have a responsibility to others, and we have a responsibility to place. And
Mm,
so, and you brought up history, and we've talked about military a bit, and some of the tragic, historic events of the middle 20th century, for instance. And so, I'm going to speak about, and I'm kind of loosely, my loose recall of this, so I'm not 100% exact, but I heard something when it came to the London air raids, that there were some, hospitals, and some of which had, mental health facilities. And so we had a number of mental health patients, some of which were, more or less in catatonic states.
mm,
And that during the London air raids, that a number of those patients, these male patients, basically they were awakened by the need. They were awakened by the call, and they stepped into service, and many of them stepped into the service by driving the ambulances at the
mm,
time. So they rose to the occasion to something bigger than themselves.
yeah. And is that, what do you think, if we're going to sum this up, because we've gone on for a while now, but if we were to sum up being manly, is that, deciding to contribute in some way that's bigger than yourself?
What, once again, responsibility. And so,
Mm,
whatever you've experienced, nine times, let's just say trauma, for instance,
yeah.
nine times out of 10, you weren't the only one in your family. So there's been a history in a lot of cases. And
Mm,
so, whether it's trauma, whether it's during tragedy, suffering, we have a responsibility to ourselves, and perhaps that involves healing. And if you do that, you're going to help your ancestors. And so let's just say, if we have some, well, you mentioned, I think a grandparent or so who escaped the concentration camps.
yeah, my grandfather, yeah.
And so I imagine perhaps this is something in your mind that you're living to your highest potential, and you're wanting to create the most significant legacy as possible, not only for your present day immediate family, but for him and many others like him. Because to the point that you're not, let's say, it would be a disservice. It'd
Right.
be almost like spitting in your ancestors' face. And I don't know about you, I refuse to do that. I can't do that.
Well, there's that component, definitely, and there's also too, I mean, I was the stepdad to 2 daughters, and also I'm the father of a son as well, and I wanna be a good role model, not just for them, but I also have nieces and nephews, so I wanna be a good role model for them. I have siblings, and I wanna be a good role model for them. So I want to live to the highest standard that I can. Doesn't mean I don't make mistakes, I do, but
Right.
I want to be an example of the highest standard that I can possibly be, and that means, each day I can be a little bit better. And that's part of my personal mission statement. Part of my personal mission statement is to learn something daily that helps me overachieve. Um, you know, because I'm setting a really high standard, but that's one of the statements in my personal mission statement. But
When
for that reason, to be those role models for people, my family, for my and for wider community as well.
when the tide comes in, all ships rise.
Yeah,
We're trying to help bring in the tide,
sounds good.
because if not us, who then?
Exactly. Well, everyone can, and by being, and that's where I was coming back to, and I spent a fair bit of time talking about it earlier, that we have the power to choose, and recognizing that we can choose our life. We can choose what we're going to do. We can choose to turn off, the social media BS. We can make that distinction. Um, it's up to us to do that, and as individuals, the more we do that, the more people will follow.
Right.
So if you were to sum it up for the guys out there, being manly, how would you sum that up?
Well, I would say that, I'm probably not going to do it the greatest service, because it's so big and complex. But what is on top of my mind right now is suffer well.
Mm,
Learn how to suffer well, and be accept and be grateful,
mm,
and don't just focus on yourself. Focus on the past, and the ancestors, your relatives, and then think about, so, the present, as well as the future, and perhaps the legacy, especially if you have children, and that
mm,
it's not all about you once again. So
mm,
if you do this, you're helping all those before you, and then all those before you. Oh, all those before you, and all the ones, ahead of you. And so, think of the bigger picture, and endurance, the
mm.
endurance. Um,
I love that.
those
That's
those those are just a few points of many, but just with those for right now.
I love that, Corey. That it's been so wonderful having you on the show, sharing your insights. You've got a very broad background, a lot of knowledge in this space. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners. It's been wonderful having you on the show.
Likewise, Damien. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.